Last week we continued the Prelude of our Eastern Front of World War II week-by-week series with an episode on the Soviet Union and its military in the 1930s, tracking its development as its leaders began facing the first purges by Stalin. Additionally, we looked at the fledgling modernization of the military and the nation's industry. This week we will focus on the major operations of the Red Army in the same era, from the Far East to Finland. We will also track the progress of Stalin's purges. Let's begin with the Soviet interventions in the Far East. This series dives deep into complex and often sensitive historical topics that may not always align with YouTube's guidelines, so your support is essential. By becoming a member or patron, you're helping keep this project alive and ensuring we can continue delivering high-quality content to our viewers without worrying about demonetization. Our members and patrons have early access to the next 6 episodes. Become one by pressing the join button under the video or via the links in the description and pinned comment, and gain access to future Eastern Front videos and 200 other exclusive episodes. The Soviets were involved in the Far East from the earliest days of the Civil War, continuing a long tradition of East-West exchange through the heart of Eastern Europe for 1,000 years, if not longer. Mongolia had been occupied by White forces in 1920 and remained so until 1924, when Soviet forces finally managed to defeat the Whites. This was only possible with the assistance of local guerrillas, under the command of Damdim Sukbetar, who became one of the founding members of the Mongolian People's Republic. This action firmly seated Mongolia into Moscow's orbit, which was to prove consequential for the conflicts to come with China and Japan. After 700 years, the tables finally turned, with Mongolia becoming a client state to Moscow. The empires of Japan and the Tsar had repeatedly clashed in the earliest days of contact between the two. This conflict reached its most violent peak in the Russo-Japanese War. The war centered around the Japanese desire to control Korea and secure for themselves a jumping-off point for further expansion into mainland Asia and the disintegrating carcass of the Qing dynasty. This was in opposition to Imperial Russian desires for control of Manchuria and what they saw as their exclusive privileges in the area. The Tsar's government was attempting to outmaneuver American and European influence in China. The last thing they wanted was to oblige another potential rival from enlarging their sphere of influence. Once the war began, it was brutal, a precursor to the bloodshed of the Western Front in the First World War. If you'd like to know more about the war, become a member of our channel today. We have an exclusive series for just our patrons and channel members on the entire Russo-Japanese War, where we cover the major operations, the causes of the war, and its aftermath. In 1929, the Chinese dictator of Manchuria, Jiang Shuiliang, seized the joint Soviet-Chinese operated Eastern Chinese Railway. The Soviets had been slowly taking over the operation of the railway, pushing out their nominal Chinese partners. This railway linked Chita to Vladivostok and the Trans-Siberian Railway to Korea and Beijing. It had been a vital link for decades at this point and was a center of operations for the Russo-Japanese War. It would be at the center of the Japanese invasion in just a few short years, as we will see. The Soviets responded to this aggression by organizing an independent Eastern Military Command under Vasily Blyukha. Notably, this command was politically independent of the Commissar, with the general in full command. This was a sign of just how serious Stalin took the situation. General Blyukha quickly organized a campaign plan. In October, he started his offensive in 2 prongs. There is debate in the sources about how long this operation went on. However, we know that it ended conclusively by December. Blyukha was hailed as a hero and feted in Moscow. The Chinese Eastern Railway in this region was returned to Soviet control, but it would not last long. In the early 1930s, Xinjiang was nominally a province of China, but had been essentially autonomous for decades. In 1930, Chiang Shih-tsai was the military governor of the Kuomintang government in Xinjiang. He was not the sole ruler, however, and had to contend with rivals for power. After a confrontation with these rivals, he sent a request to the Soviet government for aid. This was granted in significant amounts of military equipment as well as financing. In return, Chiang gave up actual control of the economic and military situation in the province to Soviet administrators. This firmly seated Xinjiang as a client state of the USSR, although it was still technically a province of the national Chinese government. Soviet interventions continued from time to time to reassert their influence when they saw it waning. In 1934, they sent 7,000 troops across the border in order to help Chiang fight off an attempt by nationalist warlords to oust him. This attack was only partially successful. It resulted in the division of Xinjiang, with Shang remaining in control of a portion of the province. This uneasy arrangement remained in place until 1937. In April of that year, Uyghurs in the southern part of Shang's area of control rose up in a rebellion. They were aided unofficially by troops of the New 36th Division, a semi-autonomous group of soldiers of the Kuomintang government. The soldiers of the New 36th Division had fought the Soviets and their client Governor Shang since his installment in 1933. Their activity was never officially acknowledged by the Kuomintang, so as not to cause an open breach between their government and the USSR. They needed Soviet military aid more than ever, as the Second Sino-Japanese War had finally broken out in July. Without support from their government, the rebels and the New 36th Division could only resist for a few months. By October, it was all over. Chiang Kai-shek was in full control of Xinjiang. He would remain so until 1944, when his double dealing with the Soviets and the Kuomintang would end with him being removed from his post. In 1931, the Japanese invaded Manchuria under the pretext of a false flag incident where Chinese extremists attacked a Japanese-operated portion of the Chinese Eastern Railway. This was actually staged by Japanese army officers operating on their own initiative. After this incident, the local army commanders started a large attack into Manchuria. Defying orders to localize the conflict, the Kwantung Army commander expanded the attack into a larger invasion. This attack would only end in 1932, after the complete occupation of the remainder of Chinese-administered Manchuria. A puppet state was set up as the Empire of Manchukuo, with the now twice-deposed Puyi ascending to the throne, such as it was. Moscow saw that as a naked power grab by the Japanese. In a single move, the Soviets had been outmaneuvered. They had the chance to occupy Manchuria just a few months prior to this, and chose instead to be satisfied with soft power. Now their control of the vital Chinese Eastern Railway was meaningless. The control of the entire region was in the hands of the Japanese. Stalin was aware that the Red Army was not prepared to counter this move. This awareness was one of the motivating factors for the modernization and industrial buildup mentioned in the last video. The new situation in Manchuria meant more than a rearmament was in order. Defenses were constructed along the new border, and plans were established in order to defend against further Japanese aggression, as well as to prepare for an invasion of Manchuria. Mongolia was brought into ever closer embrace with the Soviet Union, and mutual assistance pacts were publicly signed. Eventually, Stalin directed that ties with the nationalist Chinese government be reinforced with a non-aggression pact that was signed in 1937. Though this eased tensions somewhat between the USSR and the Chinese, the Japanese remained undeterred. In 1938, the intensity of border skirmishes between the Soviets and the Japanese started to pitch up. Notwithstanding these issues in the Far East, Stalin's Great Purge was intensifying at the same time. Thousands of officers had been removed from command, and many of them had been executed. Most famous of these was the Marshal of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Tukhachevsky, who had been at the center of the Red Army's brain trust for over a decade. These executions had a devastating effect on the command and control capability of the Red Army. The military command in the Far East, the Special Red Banner Far Eastern Army, under the now Marshal Vasily Blucher, was especially hard hit by these purges. The primary architect of the purge in the east was Genrikh Lyushkov, the commander of the NKVD under Marshal Blucher. By June, Lyushkov was fearful that he would soon be purged himself, and based on this information, defected to the Japanese army. He brought a trove of secret documents that detailed the disposition of the Red Army in the east, as well as his own personal knowledge of the weaknesses of the command structure in the wake of the purge. The Soviet government's response to this situation is still somewhat unclear. We know that the command of border units was shaken up, and that new units were dispatched to the area. Marshal Blucher was hauled into Moscow in the days following Lyushkov's defection, presumably for an official rebuke from Stalin. He was not immediately arrested, but the NKVD's attention was heightened. In July 1938, Soviet border troops moved to occupy a small outcropping around Lake Khasan. This territory, though small, was vital for the defense of strategic railways and the port city of Raijin. The situation escalated quickly, and by August, the 39th Rifle Corps, under the operational command of General Grigory Stern, was committed to the action. The Japanese committed most of the 7th Infantry Division. What had started as a minor skirmish over a hill was turning into a fully fledged battle. On August 11th, the Japanese blinked. They pulled back, admitting defeat before the battle could become the genesis for a war. Marshal Blucher was recalled to Moscow during this time, though he was not arrested until October. He died in November after weeks of torture. The successful conclusion of the Lake Khasan affair did not mean the Soviet-Japanese border disputes were over just yet. In May 1939, the area around the village of Namonhan on the river Khalkhin Gul became the scene of further skirmishing. This river was part of the border between the Mongolian People's Republic and the Manchukuo Empire. The fighting started between just a few dozen cavalrymen from each side, but quickly spiraled into several hundred men, tanks and artillery pieces being committed. In June, General Yevgeny Zhukov was sent to take command of the 57th Rifle Corps. He brought with him significant resources and more troops. The Kwantung Army reinforced their positions accordingly. There were now thousands of soldiers committed by both sides. General Zhukov was under no illusions that his career and probably his life hung in the balance. On August 20th, he started his offensive, and by August 31st, he had evicted or destroyed all Japanese forces in Mongolia. A ceasefire was signed on September 15th. This put an end to major border incursions by either side. A non-aggression pact would not be signed until 1941, but the situation remained stable. In the West, Britain and France had been attempting to negotiate a military pact with the Soviet Union to save Poland before the Nazi dictator unleashed his forces on that country. By August 1939, these negotiations were on the verge of collapse. As the final strokes of the Battle of Khalkhin Gul were being conducted by General Zhukov, the German Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop was secretly conferring with Stalin in an attempt to sway the Soviet Union into an agreement with Germany. On August 23rd, this was completed. Poland was to be divided between Stalin and Hitler. The Baltic countries, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia and Finland, were consigned to the Soviet Union's sphere of influence. Stalin was to have a free hand in these countries. The Soviets initially attempted to use the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact as leverage in negotiations with the Baltics. The Finns were to give up rights and territory in areas across the Gulf of Finland, as well as some islands in the far north. In exchange, they would receive some concessions in Karelia. The Estonians received no such consideration, and neither did the Lithuanians or Latvians. In short order, the smaller countries were browbeaten into submission and complied with Soviet demands. The Finns stood strong and refused the Soviet offers. Preparations for an invasion were mounted by late 1939. On November 30th, the campaign was launched. This would later become known as the Winter War. Despite Soviet failures, by March of the next year, the Finns capitulated. They signed a treaty that essentially met the demands Stalin had placed on the country in the weeks after the signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact the previous year. If you want to know more about the Winter War, we have a full-length documentary that covers the entire war in great detail. We also have a detailed video that covers the Battle of Khalkhin Gul from beginning to end, with much more detail than we could fit in this video. This concludes our discussion for this week. Next week, we'll go over the Spanish Civil War and the involvement of the Axis powers, as well as the Soviet contribution to the Republican effort. Stay tuned, and remember, this is just the prelude to the weekly Eastern Front of World War II series. You won't want to miss it, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see the next video in the series. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. We have started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.